Often, when he stood next to his wife, Marshal reminded me of an unhappy dog. His eyes looked as if he wanted to please her, but he was afraid he would not. His wife was about 35 years old and very pretty. Her name was Marge, but Marshal called her Ariel. No one knew why he did this. I wanted to ask him. My husband Robert told me not to. He said Marge and Marshal talked too much already. That summer, we were traveling through Italy with a group of other American tourists. Marshal and his wife were the only people our age in the group. Marshal was 42 years old. He had a weak heart. I did not understand why he always carried Marge's heavy suitcases and all her packages, but Robert would not let me ask him. Robert did not like Marge because she wanted to buy everything she saw, and he did not like Marshal because he was rich enough to buy Marge whatever she wanted. The day we arrived in Rome, Robert made me promise not to talk to Marshal and Marge. It was our last day of the trip. Robert said if Marshal and Marge toured Rome with us, it would ruin the day for him. I said, okay. We left the hotel early in the morning before Marshal and Marge woke up. We were out all day visiting museums, monuments, and churches. When we returned to our hotel that evening, we met Marshal and Marge. Marge was trying to open the door to their room. Marshal could not help her. He was carrying about 8 bags of clothing that Marge had just bought. Robert stood there with his hands in his pockets. "Did you empty another store, Marge?" he said. Marshal laughed. Marge did not. "What did you buy Bonnie today, Robert?" she asked. I took the key from her hand. "Here," I said, "let me help you." Marshal looked over the top of the packages. "Bonnie, where are you and Robert going for dinner?" I turned the key in the lock. We heard about this wonderful little Sicilian restaurant," I said as I opened the door. "Would you like to come with us?" I wanted to punish Robert for not helping Marge with the door. Marshal smiled. "I have never eaten Sicilian food. Shall we go, Ariel?" But Robert wanted his freedom. "Marge would not like this restaurant," he said. "It is not elegant." Now I was angry. "But the food is very tasty," I said. Marshal looked at Marge. "Please, honey." Marge looked at Robert and then at Marshal. Okay, we will go with you. But I will need at least 1 hour to get dressed," she said. 2 hours later, she was finally ready to leave. By the time we reached the restaurant, we all were very hungry. Marge pointed to something on her menu. "What is this dish?" she asked our waiter. The waiter just shook his head and smiled at her. "He does not speak English, Marge," Robert said. Marge lifted the napkin. "Ugh!" she said. We followed her eyes and discovered a small hole in the tablecloth. Someone had sewed the hole very nicely by hand. "Marge," I said, This tablecloth is white. It is clean. It has even been ironed. Marge was not listening to me. She continued to read the menu. "What is caponata?" she asked. I said, "It is eggplant, olives, and tomatoes." "I hate eggplant," said Marge. Robert moved closer to her. "Why not ask for a hamburger and a Coca-Cola, Marge?" Marshal touched her arm. "Ariel, honey, put down the menu. Okay? Let Bonnie order for all of us." I did not speak Italian, but I took the menu and began pointing to it. The waiter smiled as he wrote down our order. "You will see," I told Marge. "There will be plenty of food you will like." And of course there was. We ate pasta, caponata, veal, and salad. We drank wine. We ordered dessert and coffee. Marge loved everything. After we paid the bill, she said, "You know, that was really good." As we walked toward the door, she took Robert's arm. Then she turned to Marshal. "Where is that store?" she asked. "Ariel," he said gently. "No." "Marshal," she said gently. "Yes." Robert became very interested in this conversation. Marge wanted to buy something, and for the first time during this trip, Marshal said no. Marge walked out of the restaurant, still holding Robert's arm. "Let's go this way," she said, and crossed the street. "Robert, you must see this beautiful ring. I know Bonnie will love it, and it does not cost very much." Robert suddenly stopped walking. Marge stood in front of him. I was embarrassed and did not know what to do, so I put my head down and kept on walking. Marshal walked next to me. I could not look at him. Now I understood why he said no to Marge a few minutes earlier. He knew about her plan to get Robert into the store. He was trying to protect Robert from Marge. But now I was angry at him for not being able to stop her. I also was sorry for him because he loved her too much. I began to feel unhappy as I walked along with my head down. Suddenly, I saw a gold chain lying on the sidewalk in front of me. I stopped to get it, but Marshal was quicker. "This is very valuable." Marge and Robert walked to us. "Look what I found," he said, holding up the gold chain. "Let me see it," Marge demanded. "It is unbelievably beautiful," she said, as her hand closed over the chain. "Wait a minute," Robert said. "Bonnie was with Marshal. Maybe Bonnie saw it first." I shook my head. "Robert, we both saw it. I do not know who saw it first, but Marshal picked it up." "Okay," Marge said. "We can find out how much it is worth. Then Marshal will give you half the money." "No," said Robert. "I want the chain for Bonnie. I will pay you half of what the chain is worth." Suddenly, Marshal said, "Ariel, honey, you were not here and you did not see it." "I did not find it. Bonnie did. She stopped to look. All I did was pick it up." Even I do not know if Marshal was telling the truth. Who knows who saw it first? But Marge quickly gave me the chain. I am sorry," she said, a little embarrassed. "I was not thinking." A moment later, she turned to her husband. "Marshy," she said, "I want you to buy me a chain just like that." "Sure," Marshal said. "Hey, Robert and Bonnie, would you two like to have another cup of coffee?" We found a cafe and sat down. After we finished our coffee, Marge went over to the owner of the cafe. "Do you speak English?" she asked loudly. The owner nodded. "Yes." "Well, will you sell me the cups we just used for our coffee?" she asked. The owner looked a little surprised, but he washed the cups and covered them with some newspaper. Marge paid him and came back to our table with a package of cups. "I will keep them forever so I can remember our two good friends," she said to Robert and me. Then she handed the package to Marshal. "I will never forget this evening, will you?" A minute later, Marge stood up to go to the ladies' room. "I will be right back," she promised. Marshal turned to watch her as she walked through the cafe. Then he turned to us. First, he looked at Robert and then at me. "Look," he said quietly, "you two do not know her the way I do. You really do not."